Hey heroes, and welcome to another spacefaring episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. Previously on the channel, we've looked at the origins of Rahm and the other Galidorian Spaceknights, as well as their war with the shape-shifting extraterrestrials known as Dire Wraiths. We talked about how, after an encounter with Galactus, their home planet of Galidor was transported to an unknown section of space, leaving the Space Knights to wander the stars. And of course, we explained how Rahm returned to Earth, allied himself with heroes from across the planet in a final battle against the Dire Wraiths, and emerged victorious when he and Forge used an enormous neo-neutralizer to banish Wraith World itself into Limbo, depriving Wraith witches across the universe of their sorcery. While that was going on, another Space Knight, Pulsar, was battling Dire Wraiths elsewhere in the universe. Since this fight happened before the Wraith Witches were depowered, Pulsar was badly injured by a mystically summoned Deathwing, and forced to retreat, encasing himself in an energy sphere while he drifted through space. We'll come back to Pulsar a little later, but for the next part of our tale, let's turn our attention back to the planet Galidor. While they had survived their encounter with the World Eater, the people of Galidor had been separated from their protectors, and the death of the previous Prime Director resulted in a change in leadership. It was decided that a new wave of Space Knights would be commissioned, and the call once again went out for volunteers to sacrifice their humanity and be transformed. Like Rahm and his contemporaries, their removed organic parts were preserved and stored in the Hall of Science in the hopes of one day returning them to normal. However, the second-generation Space Knights were designed to be even more powerful than their predecessors. While the first generation were cyborgs, a melding of man and machine encased in Plandanium armor, the bodies of the second-generation Knights were almost completely mechanical. These new Space Knights included Heatwave, Lightning Bolt, Sound Scream, Steel Shot, and numerous others. Notable among them was Dominor, who secretly believed that Galidor had grown weak and wished to strengthen the gene pool by any means necessary. As time passed and the second-generation Space Knights remained on Galidor with no foes to challenge them, they began to grow prideful and looked down on their organic compatriots with disdain. The new Prime Director ordered that they be converted back into regular humans, but the second-generation Space Knights refused, killing him on the spot. Galidor's genetically engineered police force, the Angel Elite, attempted to stop the Space Knights, but many of them were slain as well. Led by Dominor, the Space Knights waged a terrible war on Galidor's human population, eradicating many in an attempted genocide. Those who survived were forced to hide beneath the surface, where they organized into an underground resistance movement. Meanwhile, after defeating the Wraiths on Earth, Rahm set out in search of his home planet and fellow Space Knights. He found two of his allies, Seeker and Scanner, trapped within Ego, the living planet, and successfully rescued them. Together they tracked down another Space Knight, Unam the Unseen, who had abandoned his mission to secretly rule over a colony of Dire Wraiths on a primitive jungle world by perpetuating a myth about a vengeful hidden god. Disappointed by his comrades' behavior, Rahm neutralized the Wraiths, sending them into Limbo with the rest of their banished kind. An ashamed Unam begged for forgiveness, and Rahm, harboring no ill will towards him, allowed him to join their party as they set back out into space. They next came to the planet Clavius, where the rogue Space Knight Raak the Breaker had seized control of a contingent of wraiths and used them to subjugate the local population. Rahm and his group joined forces with yet another Space Knight, Vola Trapper, who was assisting the local resistance. The Spaceknights and the Clavians mounted an attack on Raak's Wraith forces, but in the ensuing battle, Unam the Unseen sacrificed his own life to save Rahm. In the end, the Spaceknights defeated their former ally, and Raak was banished to Limbo along with his Wraith troops. Elsewhere, the Force Sphere containing the Space Knight Pulsar was found by a dreadnought starship from the Shi'ar Empire. We've talked about the Shi'ar on the channel before, but at the time their empire was the largest in the known universe, containing a multitude of races and allegedly as many as 1 million planets. One world to be inducted into this vast intergalactic conglomerate was the planet Calernia, whose denizens were once a race of cat-like barbarian warriors. After being overwhelmed by the superior tactics and technology of the Shi'ar, the Calernians were swiftly subjected to Shi'ar rule, and their once warmongering society was transformed into a community of farmers, doctors, and other roles to benefit the Empire. Getting back to the story at hand, the Shi'ar vessel that found the Force Sphere brought it on board, but a disoriented Pulsar emerged and attacked, before seemingly succumbing to his injuries in the ensuing battle. His body, still barely alive, was examined by the ship's Calernian medic, Dr. Tiresias, who used Shi'ar technology to transplant himself into Pulsar's Plandanium armor. Naming himself a Liberator, he destroyed the Dreadnought and swore revenge on the Shi'ar for subjugating his people. He returned to Calernia to rally support. However, those who remained there were enjoying a period of peace and prosperity, and refused to rise up in fear of retaliation. Rahm and his party, meanwhile, investigated the wreckage of the Shi'ar dreadnought and were consequently confronted by Gladiator, the praetor of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. While Rahm and his allies briefly clashed with the Imperial Guard, he ultimately convinced Gladiator that Galidor was not responsible for any attack on the Shi'ar, and both sides united to confront Liberator. In the ensuing conflict, Rahm tried to resolve things peacefully by neutralizing Liberator's abilities and attempting to talk to him. However, Gladiator was duty-bound to execute enemies of the Empire and fatally wounded the Calernian Space Knight. Before he perished, Liberator explained his motivations, and Rahm sympathized with his desire to rebel against oppression. Out of respect for Rahm, Gladiator activated a Shi'ar Stargate, programming it to scan the universe for Galidor's location so the Space Knights could be sent home. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Rahm's ally, Brandy Clark, had formed something of a found family with Rick Jones and Cindy Adams, the latter of which was a young girl who was orphaned during the Wraith War. While Rahm was gathering his allies in space, Brandy, Rick, and Cindy encountered a virtually omnipotent extra-dimensional entity known as the Beyonder, which is a name that longtime viewers of the channel are no doubt familiar with by now. For context, this meeting happened during the Second Secret Wars event, in which the Beyonder came to Earth in an attempt to learn more about the concept of desire. To this end, he granted Brandy Clark's secret wish to regain the power she once wielded, transforming her once again into the Space Knight Starshine. He also healed Rick the cancer he was battling at the time, and even transformed him into a superhuman reminiscent of his old allies, the Hulk and Captain Marvel. Cindy, meanwhile, hoped that the Beyonder could resurrect her parents, and while he was unable to retrieve a soul that had already passed into the afterlife, he revealed that the life essence of Cindy's parents was still being held by the dire Wraith who killed them, and sent Brandy and Rick into Limbo to retrieve it. With that, the Beyonder was able to reconstruct their bodies, allowing the Adams family to be reunited. Unsure of what else to ask of the Beyonder and wary of any unforeseen consequences, Rick then simply wished to be returned to healthy human form, free of both his cancer and the responsibility of superhuman powers. Brandy, meanwhile, also wished to be restored to human form, but her true desire was to be beside her beloved Rahm. The Beyonder thus sent her to the planet Galidor, but once there she found herself amidst battle-scarred city ruins that didn't match the splendor that Rahm had described to her. She was soon attacked by the second-generation Space Knight Lightning Bolt, but was fortunately rescued by members of Galidor's human resistance, and recognized their language as one that had been used by Rahm. The Galidorians similarly recognized Brandy's use of the name Rahm, and after killing Lightning Bolt, brought her back to their headquarters. There, she was able to communicate with them thanks to an omniversal translator similar to the one used by Rahm, and met with the Resistance leader, Ariane. The two women exchanged information, and Brandy came up with a plan to gain leverage by taking control of the Hall of Science, allowing them to hold the Space Knights' human remains hostage. In the ensuing assault, 3 surviving members of the Angel Elite attempted to take down 2 Space Knights that were standing guard. However, the one known as Sound Scream survived their initial assault and struck back, killing all 3 before Ariane finished him with one of Lightning Bolt's energy spears. Resistance forces fought their way into the Hall of Science and even reached the cryogenic chambers containing the Space Knight's remains, and as luck would have it, Rahm and his Space Knight squadron materialized beside them thanks to their use of the Shi'ar Stargate. Taking advantage of this momentary confusion, the second-generation Knights opened fire on the human resistance. Furthermore, Heatwave, who was a particularly fanatical Space Knight, declared that he had no desire to ever become human again, and destroyed the cryo chambers himself, robbing every Space Knight of the chance to be restored to normal. In the ensuing battle, the Space Knight squadron attempted to protect the rebels from Heatwave's forces. However, there was only so much they could do as Rahm was unwilling to kill his own compatriots, and in the end Ariane and the last surviving Galidorian humans went down fighting. Having failed to protect them, Rahm, Brandy, Trapper, Seeker, and Scanner fled underground to plan their next move. Meanwhile, the warlord of the second-generation Space Knights, Dominor, questioned Heatwave's decisions. As mentioned earlier, his ultimate goal was to strengthen the Galidorian gene pool, and so he always intended for the Space Knights to reclaim their humanity after exterminating those he deemed beneath them. He even kept his own remains preserved in a glowing orb that could be used to restore himself, and hid it within his home base, the Dark Tower. However, most of the other second-gen Knights supported Heatwave's desire to keep their mechanical bodies, and even petitioned to destroy Galidor itself and strike out into the universe. Seeking to put an end to the fighting and death, Rahm infiltrated the Dark Tower and challenged Dominus himself to a duel. At the same time, Seeker, Trapper, and Scanner fought their way to the tower's communications room and sent a signal to the other first-generation Space Knights. Unfortunately, soon after getting their message out, they were overwhelmed by their enemies and all 3 were slain. Unable to participate in either battle, Brandy Clark was left underground and searched for anything that would allow her to help. What she found was a crypt containing the body of Terminator, the Space Knight that had previously been transformed into a mirror image of Rahm using his removed biological components. Back in the Dark Tower, the real Rahm continued his battle with Dominor, and while his younger opponent appeared to possess superior armor, Rahm's semi-sentient neutralizer, Axadar, was one of the most powerful weapons ever produced on Galidor, allowing him to claim victory. Declaring that Dominor was unfit to lead, Heatwave had the other second-gen knights join him to form a ring of power in an attempt to destroy the entire planet. However, it turns out that Dominor had sabotaged this technique, causing it to backfire and instead destroy those who attempted to use it, including Heatwave. Surviving the fall of the Dark Tower, Dominor explained that his end goal had always been to repopulate Galidor with a superior race of humanity, but upon realizing that the orb containing his own humanity had been destroyed along with the tower, Dominor lost the will to live and killed himself with Rahm's neutralizer. In the wake of this battle, Rahm was found in the ruins of the tower by Brandy Clark and the other first-generation Spaceknights who received Scanner's signal. Thanks to the discovery of Terminator's preserved body, they were able to recover Rahm's organic remains in a glowing orb. And so, after 2 centuries of fighting, the first Space Knight Rahm was finally allowed to lay down his weapons and reclaim his humanity. Unable to do the same, the other Space Knights decided to return to the stars, but promised they would watch over Galidor forevermore. Rom and Brandy, meanwhile, embarked on a quest to rebuild his ravaged world, and the two became husband and wife. Between survivors found amidst the wreckage and colonists returning from other worlds, reconstruction efforts went even quicker than expected, and soon the capital city of Galidoria stood proud once again. Rahm was made the new Prime Director and was sometimes known as Director Artur, a name derived from Brandy's appreciation of Arthurian legend. To aid in the planet's repopulation, accelerated growth technology was reportedly used to hasten the development of the next generation. Meanwhile, Brandy and Rahm had 2 sons of their own, Balin and Tristan. As they grew up, Brandy told her children about her homeworld, and while Tristan embraced his Terran heritage, Balin did not, causing some friction between the two. On top of his struggles to measure up to his father and older brother, Tristan was occasionally stricken with precognitive visions that he had a little control over. To protect Galidor from further catastrophe, a Space Knight Academy was founded to train worthy candidates among those who possessed the rare genetic template that allowed them to bond with the 3rd generation Space Knight armor. Unlike their predecessors, these new Space Knights were not forced to surrender their humanity and could resume their original form at will, storing their armor in subspace when not in use. This allowed Brandy to become a Space Knight once again, and she apparently operated as the new Scanner for a time, before ultimately returning to her duties as a mother and a political leader. Her eldest son, Balin, entered the academy upon coming of age and succeeded in graduating with top honors, while the younger child, Tristan, narrowly made the cut 3 years later. Honoring those that came before, many of the 3rd generation Space Knights adopted the names of their predecessors. For example, Balin donned a black armor capable of projecting deadly eye beams and became the new Terminator. Tristan, meanwhile, was granted a Space Knight form reminiscent of his father's and took the name Liberator. Other 3rd generation Space Knights included Darren, who became the new Javelin, Ranela, who became the new Scanner, Rand, the new Lightning Bolt, Anara, the new Starshine, Bron, the new Hammerhead, Lan, the new Pulsar, and Tarn, who became the new Firefall. Among these knights, Tristan grew particularly close to Ranela, the new Scanner, and the two started a relationship. Another notable 3rd Gen Knight was Val, aka Sentry, as he was the first known member of the Angel Elite to prove compatible with Space Knight armor. In addition to the Space Knights and the Angel Elite, the Galidorians also established the Colonial Vanguard, a military branch meant to counterbalance the Space Knights, as well as an interstellar spy agency. The leaders of each of these groups also formed a war council as part of Galidor's high command. Meanwhile, a surviving faction of dire wraiths known as the Nazgoth were plotting their revenge. Eventually, they developed the technology to encase captive humanoids in a new type of armor, transforming them into cyborg servants known as Wraith Knights. With knights of their own, the Wraiths launched attacks on Galidor's neighboring systems, tricking several populated worlds into believing that their aggressors were Galidorian Space Knights. Seeking to resolve the situation peacefully, Rahm attempted to lead a diplomatic mission on the nearby planet Trion. However, on the way there, his ship, the Praxis, was attacked and destroyed by Wraith Knights, with only the winged Space Knight Sentry surviving to make it back home. In the wake of this tragedy, Balin was selected to become the new Prime Director. However, he found himself unable to wield his father's semi-sentient neutralizer, Axidar, and was rejected by it. Despite this, when Gaspar, the Lord of Spies, revealed that Trion and 4 other planets were forming an alliance against them, Balin declared a full state of war and rallied support from his fellow Galidorians. He led the Space Knights in an invasion of Trion, quickly subduing the local resistance, but what he didn't know was that Lord Gaspar was a traitor that was working with the Nazgoth. Gaspar even attempted to destroy Rahm's neutralizer with an illegal gravitational imploder, but the weapon secretly saved itself by disappearing into subspace. Furthermore, during the occupation of Trion, a Wraith Knight attempted to assassinate Tristan, but at the last second he was stricken with another of his visions, causing his teammate Lightning Bolt to be shot and killed instead. Unsurprisingly, this whole situation eventually culminated in a battle between the Space Knights and the Wraith Knights, during which the dire Wraiths once again summoned their most powerful weapon, a soul-consuming Deathwing, something which at the time was thought to be impossible. Meanwhile, the various planets attacked by the Wraith Knights formed an allied armada to stand united against Galidor. In the end, the winged Space Knight Sentry succeeded in decapitating the commanding Wraith Knight. However, this caused the Deathwing to go out of control and head towards the allied armada. At that moment, Rahm's neutralizer rematerialized from subspace, appearing in Tristan's hand. This allowed him to defeat both the Deathwing and the Wraith Knights, in the process convincing the allied armada of Galidor's innocence. With peace restored between Galidor and its neighbors, Tristan named his mother Brandy the next Prime Director, a decision that his brother supported, and stood ready to fight if the Wraiths ever returned. Later, during the Annihilation War, in which Annihilus united the Negative Zone's overwhelming forces in a massive invasion of the Positive Universe, the Galidorian Space Knights were among those who joined the United Front, a cross-species alliance assembled by Rahm's old ally, Nova. Shortly after that conflict, there was an incident in which the artificial intelligence Ultron seized control of a faction of the Phalanx, a form of techno-organic life with the ability to infect others with the transmode virus. A number of Space Knights were subsequently infected and assimilated into Ultron's collective, including one named Daystar and another, Lightstorm, both of whom were ultimately killed in the ensuing conflicts. In the end, Ultron was defeated by the heroes who united against him, and those he infected were cured by a pair of Technarchs, Warlock and Tyro, and their Kree ally, Wraith, who it should be noted is unrelated to the Dire Wraiths. Following this, shortly before sacrificing himself in an event known as the Thanos Imperative, the interstellar adventurer Star-Lord tasked the telepathic Russian space dog Cosmo with assembling some of the most powerful warriors in the universe to form a team known as the Annihilators. Galidor was invited to provide a Space Knight for this group, and eager to atone for their failings during the Phalanx Conquest, they sent the most powerful Space Knight in the newly created 4th generation, a woman named Ikon. While considered the greatest living Space Knight at the time, she was also incredibly brash and arrogant, which led to more than a little friction in the newly created team. However, they were soon united against an enemy the Space Knights had long thought vanquished, Dr. Dredd. In truth, this Dredd was actually a Skrull named Klobak, whose study of dark magic was considered illegal under the Skrull Empire. You may recall from previous videos that the Dire Wraiths descended from a sect of Skrulls who practiced similar sorcery. For his crime, Klobak was sentenced to hard labor in a Skrull penal colony, but when that world was destroyed during the Annihilation War, Klobak survived and escaped. Turning his attention back towards his studies, he mystically summoned the spirit of the original Dr. Dredd, a Wraith warlock that had been killed by Rahm years prior. Dredd passed on his knowledge, and Klobak assumed his identity to become the new Dr. Dredd. He joined forces with the Wraith Queen Volks and plotted to free the Dire Wraiths from Limbo. However, he secretly plotted to restore the Skrull Empire to power by mystically transforming the Wraiths into a new breed of Skrull. Taking advantage of Queen Brandy's grief over her husband's death and her desire for the Space Knights to be seen as heroes, the Wraith Queen secretly manipulated the Prime Director into providing information that allowed them to take Wraith World's original Black Sun and begin merging it with the star that Galidor now orbited. In an effort to restore the cosmic balance, Ikon and the Annihilators took Queen Volks captive and traveled to Wraith World in Limbo, where her subjects, with their power greatly diminished and their population starving, rejected their former matriarch and wished only for death. The arrival of the Annihilators in Limbo also caught the attention of that dimension's ruler, Immortus, and after a battle with his time-spanning forces, Immortus allowed them to bring Wraith World out of Limbo, saving its population from extinction. Soon afterwards, Dredd attempted to enact his own endgame by converting the Wraiths into Skrulls, but Queen Volks sacrificed herself to stop him, killing him and unraveling his spells in the process. In the end, the Annihilators used their immense power to stabilize the merging stars and rearranged the system to form a new balance. On one side of the star system, Galidor was in geosynchronous orbit with the bright side of the sun, whereas on the opposite side, Wraith World always faced the black side. In the wake of this, the Galidorians and the Dire Wraiths brokered a new era of peace, in which Queen Brandy would lead her people in providing aid and restitution to the Wraiths as they rebuilt their society. If our story ended here, one might assume they lived happily ever after, but alas, Galidor was later targeted by an ancient, technologically advanced race known as the Builders. Many Space Knights fought to defend their world, including Terminator, Starshine, Ikon, Pulsar, and Firefall, but in the end Galidor was overwhelmed by the Builders, and the entire star system was seemingly destroyed. Fortunately, a number of Space Knights survived and succeeded in saving another world, Centauri 4, from the threat of the Builders. Furthermore, while Galidor was badly damaged, it was not completely annihilated as most of the universe believed. The ruins of Galidor were later found by a Centaurian freebooter named Yondu Udanta, who gave the survivors a legendarily powerful artifact called the Herald's Cup to aid in their reconstruction efforts. Today, while the people of Galidor work to rebuild their world yet again, those Spaceknights who remain continue to wander the stars, fighting against injustice and carrying on the legacy of the first and greatest among them, Rahm. That is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!